The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Spencer Giese from the ACUHO home office, and I am excited for you all to be attending our LGBTQ network webinar, Finding Yourself in Activism on Campus. Before we get started, I want to make sure that we've got technological functionality for all of our attendees. On your GoToWebinar browser, you should see a hand that means you can raise your hand. If you could click that hand icon next to your name, that'll show that you can hear me, that your volume is working, and that you're able to raise your hand and be an active participant in the session. All right, I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. That's excellent. If you could click those again, then those will go away. Perfect. Also on that same browser, you'll see the questions ability where you can type in questions at any time during today's webinar, and our presenters will answer those fittingly. So I will throw it over to our presenters. Thank you again for attending.
All right, wonderful. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. My name is Derek Murakami. I serve as the ACUHO LGBT Network Chair-elect. So thank you so much for giving your time and dedication to your own personal and professional development and joining us for our discussion on finding yourself in activism on campus. Again, my name is Derek Murakami. I use he, him, his, my pronouns, and I currently serve as an assistant director for the Office of Residential Education at the University of Southern California. And I will go ahead and turn it over to our guest presenter and have them introduce themselves.
Thanks, Derek. Hi, everyone. My name is Elias Johnson. I'm a newly minted doctor, and I'm here to talk about my dissertation research as well as to talk more about activism and how you can find your way within activism on campus. So a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about today are going to be pulled directly from my dissertation research. I'm not an expert in every single form of activism. I'm just more specifically focused on non-binary trans populations and their engagement with resistance and activism. So thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. All right, so we'll go ahead and flip to the next page here, which shows kind of the prepared questions that we had for our discussion today. Certainly, if there are questions that you have throughout the discussion or wish to ask a follow-up to any of the responses that you may hear, please feel free to jump on in. This is hopefully going to be an interactive session. As we know, this is a very relevant topic for many of us at our university campuses. So Alandis, I'll go ahead and start us off with our first question, if you would be willing to answer. So that question is, how have you seen campus activism take form at different campuses?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between what we see as activism and what we see as resistance. And so my dissertation research focused specifically on resistance, which is like pushback on, based on identity. So when we see students resisting in certain ways, they're usually going to engage in forms of activism. Whether that's active or passive types of resistance, it can take all different forms. So, like what I see with more specifically, like the formation of student groups, whether those are support groups, activism groups, educational groups, list of demands, like this is what I'd like to see from my university campus. It could be, the establishment of policy developments. So, like gender inclusive housing or something like that. Establishment of educational programs where they're actually putting them on, through like Safe Zone or RA training or, diversity affairs, and getting involved in that way to educate other people. And then also just like getting involved in the community outside of the school. So, what are they doing to impact their local economies and communities in ways that are generative and in most cases intersectional. So thinking more about the broad picture, not just specifically their identity-based politics. And then just being themselves. So what does that mean? So like resistance on a college campus can simply just being on campus, living in a residence hall, and like having an identity such as like a transgender identity, a non-binary identity. It goes against a lot of the structures that are in place. And so when we see students like reacting to all the different forms of oppression that exist on campus, it's usually going to take some form of resistance. You know, nobody likes the feeling of oppression and discrimination. And so, you know, they do things subversively to counteract that. And of course, like the resurgence of activism on campus, it's taken a large upswing in the last few years, more specifically with the political climate that's been going on. So, so yeah, like you see students getting heavily involved in trying to make their campus communities better in all sorts of ways. And so, like, I just have a little snippet of some of those ways, more specifically to the non-binary and trans community.
Great, thank you, Alandis. Yeah, I think that's a good point of also recognizing that just existence on a college campus is a form of activism or just resistance. So I appreciate you kind of sharing that aspect as well. So hopefully that leads us into kind of our next question here is, you know, how can activism inspire campus change, structural, social, whatever that might be at our university campuses?
Definitely. I saw this a lot with my participants that were part of my dissertation study. So to give some context, I had 9 students from across the country that identified somewhere within the non-binary umbrella. And I say more non-binary specifically because they don't really fit the mold of what we see as like non-trans women and men. So like typically campuses are established within that binary. You know, bathrooms, policies, locker rooms, everything is established in kind of that way. And campuses have slowly but surely developed policies around gender inclusion and, you know, through housing, more specifically for ACUHO, bathrooms, locker rooms, you know, admissions, all those sorts of things. But that's not limited to say that it doesn't, I mean, like, that's not to say that it doesn't still exist. And that's like the term that, you know, me and a lot of other people refer to it as is binary genderism. So this experience of oppression based in the binary. And so, you know, I see in terms of campus change, there's a lot of things that students and faculty and staff have been doing to change that culture. And, you know, like a lot of it is based in this identity because, like, you know, like for me, I studied the stuff that I did in grad school because it mattered to me. I identify as a non-binary person as well. And so, you know, it takes a severe toll on you just being on campus. So the more that people like yourselves can do to listen, encourage, and inspire these students to take up the reins to create this change, I think the better. And of course, like we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but and I'll probably come back to this question because I think it's needs some context for some of the other things that I'll talk about. But I think that you know, activism is an immense vehicle for creating social change on our campuses.
Great, thank you, Alandis. Maybe a follow-up to that, you know, oftentimes as a residence life professional, I hear the concerns and frustrations from our students about not seeing the change that they want to have happen on campus at the rate at which they want it to happen. So do you have any kind of insight or maybe advice about how to not necessarily temper some of that, I think, frustration, but helping students understand or celebrate the wins and change that they are creating on campus through their activism?
I mean, definitely. So So as we know, like working in student affairs, change moves very slowly. And I think it's good to give some history and perspective when students are truly engaging in, you know, change efforts on campus. So what has been done previously? What would we like to see? Like, is there any assessment that is related to some of the concerns that they're sharing? Are there ways that we can do more in terms of like assessing the campus climate or working toward something, you know, completely radical and that's never been done before on the campus? Are there other campuses? Like, is there any kind of benchmark for like, you know, showing them and illustrating like, hey, you know, this has actually been done at this other campus that's similar to ours. Maybe we can try it this way. But, you know, I think in terms of like getting students on board, it also takes getting administrators on board and understanding the value that it's adding to the campus community, you know, from the bottom to the top.
Great. Yeah, I think that then leads us into our next question that we have there is, so as students begin to engage in this kind of social discourse on campus, what advice do you have to support those students, understanding also our role as a university staff member?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important first to understand your biases and like where you stand personally on any of these issues. Because, you know, if you don't have a firm grasp on like what you believe, and it's going to come through. And I know sometimes like university administrators are in precarious positions, especially when it comes to their own identity. So what can they do to, you know, hear the student and also respect where you're at in that dialogue or even with that issue that you're dealing with. And I think, you know, I think a lot of times students look to administrators to like really spearhead really radical change on campus. They're always looking to you for, you know, advice, support, and like they trust you. They see you as a valuable resource, which is a good thing. You know, like we want our students to feel that way and feel that sense of support and also challenge. But it's not necessarily like always in university policy for your job that you're able to share and also be part of those movements that are happening on campus. You know, I know some specific places have very explicit rules about involvement in activism, protests, etc. And so just understanding like if there are rules, like making sure you follow them. I don't want you to lose your job. But also to make sure that like you can get involved in ways that like don't make you look like less of a professional to these students. They're very impressionable. So if we're thinking about student learning, most of the college students that are coming through, especially in the residence halls, are in Keegan's terms like a socialized order of mind. So they're not making sense of their values and beliefs in a way where they're completely owning it. They're doing it because others are, you know, influencing them to believe such things. So, you know, like all the things that you do to encourage that growth and development to a more self-authored frame of mind are good things. Like, you know, so do all those things, scaffold the learning, like you know, we teach, and also, you know, help them articulate some of those values for themselves. So, you know, what do you think about this? How might this be helpful to understand like the nuances of the different arguments? So what do you know about this term? Or what do you know about this like group or this movement, etc. And help them educate themselves on it.
That's great, thank you. would you say maybe any of this advice, looks different for those students that also live in university housing, knowing that they live now where maybe some of this is taking place and may not able to as easily escape kind of that environment?
Yeah, again, socialized, they're in that socialized frame of mind most of the time. So, like working with them on like managing those emotions, because, activism and being involved in these movements is extremely exhausting. That was like one of the biggest findings from my dissertation is, just the sense of tiredness and exhaustion that comes with being non-binary. Like they're already exhausted, and yet we ask so much of them. And like, of course, they're going to volunteer because they're passionate, and this it affects them. So like connect them with others. I think that's like a really good way to I don't know, make you less of the point person for that. Connect them with other like-minded individuals that exist in our residence halls, because they do exist, and also provide them outlets for ways to voice their frustrations with things that happen within the residence hall environment. I think that's like a good first step, and like just listen. Doesn't necessarily even have to lead to anything, but just to listen, I think, is a lot more than a lot of the students will actually experience within their their time in the residence halls. A lot of the participants in my study were like so frustrated with housing because the administrators just didn't listen to them. Like they drafted policies, they started support groups, they did all forms of activism, and yet still administrators were very hesitant to even listen to them. And so, like all of that stress and frustration adds up after time. And so if they're trying to escape to a place like a residence hall and feel that sense of support and comfort that you want home to feel like, and they're not getting it, that's really, really frustrating. And it breaks my heart, like hearing those stories and knowing that like they're having such a hard time living on campus. So start, connect them with other people, and just listen.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder of kind of the role that we can certainly serve in helping connect those students and bridging some of those gaps, knowing as we interact with different student groups within our communities, that we can kind of do some of that work on behalf of our students. So yeah, thank you for that reminder. We kind of talked a little bit about this next question, but maybe want to delve a little bit deeper and kind of some of that difficulty navigating your role, balancing being a university employee and then wanting to engage in campus activism on a personal level.
Definitely. So I feel like I've been pretty radical since I got into student affairs, and it's gotten me in some trouble over time. But I think at the stage I'm in now, like I've learned how to manage it a little bit better. So like a lot of my roles have been teaching classes, and your role in university housing might not necessarily involve that type of engagement with students. But I found it to be an incredible venue to talk about, and also encourage them to get involved in their communities that they care about. So I've taught like women, gender, sexuality studies classes, as well as like some of the Sahi master's classes at Miami. And a lot of them have been really focused on like taking ownership of, your values, beliefs, etc. So just allowing students' passions to fuel some of the work that they're doing in those classes or those spaces. That could look different for university housing. Like you have hall councils, you have all sorts of ways to encourage those passions to develop, and also the programmatic space to do it. So allowing them space, allowing them time, within your hall council to pitch programs that they're passionate about, to start subcommittees or groups. I think that those are all valuable means. If you have mentorship opportunities, like Is there like an equity or inclusion peer mentor in the residence halls? Like that's another leadership opportunity that will help them feel a sense of connection and also feel like they're being heard. Yeah, so like, I mean, I've seen anywhere from like starting small student groups that are focused on specific issues. So like, you know, whether that's environmentalism or, you know, Black Lives Matter or trans-specific stuff, and have taken it in all sorts of directions. So more recently, I was part of this group called the Mobilizing Anger Collective on Miami's campus. It got started by 3 professors in my department and kind of like took off from there. But because of that, I got involved in this other committee on campus that deals with justice and human rights. And so I found that as a really good venue for me to like explore some of these things, as well as bring some really valuable speakers to campus that can educate on a variety of different issues that students and staff and faculty can take advantage of. So, you know, activism doesn't necessarily have to be like pickets and protests. It can be educational as long as you're fueling your time, your energy, your passion into something that matters.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's also important to remember, yeah, how you were kind of talking about different forms of what activism resistance may look like. I know many of my residence directors were very passionate about many of the marches that were happening throughout the academic year, and were willing to chaperone and take students to those marches as a way of also kind of being personally engaged in the subject matter that intersected with their own kind of personal interests and passions. So yeah, I think there are certainly ways to kind of navigate that imbalance without, as you mentioned, kind of overstepping or kind of putting yourself into some trouble, like you mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it also is important to recognize like when your leadership is not needed. So taking a step back, and if you're in a position of privilege, like for example, I'm white, you know, like recognizing when, you know, a person of color needs to be in a leadership position for the group. So yeah, and like where your skills, talents, abilities might best suit a group. So, you know, like I'm not a super great public speaker, but I'm doing this webinar. But like I have a lot of education to share with other people, and so like I'm happy to do anything like that, as long as, you know, it's worthwhile and valuable.
Great, thank you, Landis. So for this next question, which I feel many folks might kind of want to hear some kind of perspective, as a student affairs, housing, or res life professional, you know, these social issues certainly affect us on a personal level. So what thoughts or ideas do you have for professional staff that navigate their personal and professional selves within the university environment around kind of what's going on in our kind of climate now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that examining of your own values and beliefs and things that you're passionate about, because like you're gonna and also just surround yourself with people that are equally committed to such causes, because there's a lot of things that you might not know. Like I don't know, like you surround yourself with people that think like you, whether you know it consciously or not. And so like, you know, start surrounding yourself with different types of people if you're really wanting to get into more different spheres of influence. So yeah, and like recognizing where your leadership and service is needed. It may not be like, you know, in the leadership role, it could be anywhere, you know, like doing menial things, but that's still valuable. And it's needed for movements to function. So I think about like all the different things that I've seen kind of pop up, you know, since the election of President Trump, and like so many people have become so engaged in this, you know, this political moment, and have done all different sorts of things to re-energize or get re-inspired by what's been going on. And you know, it's also brought some challenges too. So like when we see our college and university campuses changing, because of some of the things that have been enacted, you know, I think it takes a huge toll on us individually and collectively. So, you know, what can we do? How can we make this movement go forward versus, you know, like letting ego get in the way? So yeah, so those are just some preliminary ideas. I'm not necessarily like the only expert on this. And I know that there's a lot of other people that have valuable things to share. There's all different sorts of, you know, research being done currently on activism, more specifically like student activism, activism from like campus administrators, and tons of things that are being written like every day. So, you know, I'm just one voice in this pool of amazing people.
Yeah, I know. I think one of the things that I saw as a supervisor of new professionals this past year is one, being able to model when I need to kind of acknowledge and extend kind of an understanding of their own humanity. So checking in with my supervisees about what's been going on, both on campus, around the world, in our local community, and making sure that they're well on a personal level. You know, we certainly ask a lot from them in terms of job responsibilities. And so how can I, you know, take that step to ensure that on a personal level, they are being cared for, and they know that at least their supervisor that they can work with can at least acknowledge that piece that maybe today is not a great day for me to be fully present and engaged at work, and that mentally, emotionally, whatever it may be, psychologically, I am kind of checked out, and that you know, that's understood, and to continue to kind of keep those lines of communication open with both your employer, supervisor, peers, when maybe you need to step away and kind of take kind of that personal time to collect yourself, or be around, like you said, people that are as equally passionate, understand maybe your experience, that you can kind of process and kind of share that experience with.
Yeah, likewise, like be realistic on the types of change that you can accomplish. Just like we tell students to be realistic, professionals also need to be realistic. Like, you know, I don't want to encourage anyone to lose their jobs because, you know, the workplace environment can be a precarious and dangerous place for some. And so, you know, there's this term that that I use for some of the actions of my participants, but this idea of tempered radicalism. So making change in small incremental ways, and doing what's realistic, and to move it forward. So it's not necessarily like a big change, but it's enough to make a difference, and it gets the ball rolling. So so yeah, like thinking about how change is hard at any institution. It doesn't matter where you are in the country, like it's going to be hard. There's competing priorities. And for me, you know, it all comes down to congruence. So, you know, what individually do you believe in, and how is that university or department or, you know, division not being congruent with those values? And so, like, are they doing exactly what they say in their mission statement, their value statements? And if not, you know, work on changing it to the point where, you know, it is congruent. There's a scholar, Sarah Ahmed, she talks about this idea of a non-performative. And pretty simply, like, it's just, is what is written actually what you're doing? So, like, think about that for yourself, like, in terms of your own values and beliefs, like, is this what you value, and is this actually what you're doing? But, you know, I think it all comes at a cost too. So, like, how much energy, time, passion, resources are you going to fuel into that?
Great. So taking us to our last kind of prepared question, how do you see campus or student activism taking form in the future?
I didn't think I realized this before engaging in my research process, like how much of activism is fueled by this idea of love and care. So, like, we care about our communities that we're part of. We care about, you know, the students that we work with. And and of course, like with that, like also comes like a need and desire to change things, and to make it a better place for all the people that are there. So, you know, like I think about like this current institutional moment, this current political moment, and all those things, like, you know, I really don't have all the answers. And like I've thought about this so much, but like I don't necessarily want to ascribe some best practices for, you know, this is exactly how activism should look like. You know, make it what works for you and your institution. You know, with all those considerations in mind. I think, you know, students on a whole are much more interested and invested in doing activism, being resistant to certain things that they see as unjust on college campuses. And so, you know, that could be for a variety of different reasons, a variety of different things that they hold dear. But it's important to realize like how much at that point they've been socialized, and where their socialization is coming from. It's coming primarily from their families, and people that are close to them. So, you know, this is also a time for them to experiment. So what are they thinking about? How are they thinking differently about any of the things that they've been taught up until this point? So yeah, and like I often reference like this perspective from Courtney Martin. She wrote this really smart book called Do It Anyway, and pretty much it's posited in this idea that millennials for the longest time have been told that they got to save the world in all sorts of ways, and a lot of times that can seem really daunting when charged with saving the world, because, you know, as we know, like the environment's going downhill, politics, you know, that's really divisive. Our campuses are, you know, more politically charged than ever, and yet students are still like under the impression that they're supposed to save the world. And she says to just do it anyway, like do whatever you can in any kind of way that you can. And that's, you know, attending to yourself as a person, making sure you're taking care of yourself, drinking water, you know, not letting people steal your magic, all those things. Like you need to do those things foundationally in order to serve communities better. And just like in student affairs, like you can be as busy as you want, but it can only last for so long before there are repercussions for those actions. So yeah, attending to yourself and also attending to your communities. It's important to do those in tandem.
Great, thank you, Alandis. So those were the prepared questions that we had. We certainly want to open up to any questions that the participants' audience may have. You know, one of the initial questions that we did have is maybe talking about what are those first steps? What are those actionable kind of takeaways from our today's discussion that folks can kind of apply to their campus now, whether they're a new professional just jumping into their first full-time professional role or have been at their institutions for quite some time. What are some first steps that folks can kind of apply in the immediate?
I think the first step anyone or like anybody on campus working in a job should really to be reevaluating their mission, values, statements, and seeing if they're congruent. Because if you're not doing things that are congruent with those things, like, you know, what's the point? Is this making an equitable and inclusive environment for all the students on your campus? I mean, look beyond your privilege to see like where areas like where you can improve, and you can take that data from anywhere. Like there's a lot of surveys and stuff that go out through different various housing entities, ACUHO included. And so, you know, what are you doing to also like measure those campus climates in a way that like really captures what it's like to be a student there? And then, you know, like if you don't have any of that data or anything like that, talk to some students. Like it's very easy to get get the pulse of what students are thinking about, what they're passionate about, and you know, work with the ones that are passionate at you know, whatever place they are. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything big. It could just be, you know, working, like, let's work on a proposal to get more recycling in the residence hall. Let's work on a proposal to, you know, to make gender inclusive housing a thing. Or, you know, like, do those things even exist? Like, what's going on? And then you can take further steps, you know, as you get along. But I think for you personally, like also examining what's important to you. Where is the university like not meeting those needs? And finding that outside, maybe in the community, to take it to the next step. So, you know, like for me, disability justice is a big thing, and so is environmental justice. But those things I don't necessarily find on a university campus to the same degree that I could find outside in the community. So like, how am I going to give back in those ways? How am I going to educate others? There's all kinds of tools to do that, and all kinds of groups in the community to do that too. And if there isn't one, you can start one. So, or just do it by yourself. Like that's cool too. Social media has offered so many immense platforms to talk about these things, and to make them known to people that might not have fully realized, you know, your perspective. And sharing your story is powerful. So share your story more often. That's another good step. But yeah, so those are just some brief things that I can think of, at least to get started. And then hopefully, I know that you all have great suggestions too.
Yeah, so you know, one of the other pieces that I was thinking about, Alandis, is for students who, you know, maybe kind of entering into this kind of activism type environment for the very first time, who might be a little bit timid or unsure of, you know, how to kind of navigate, you know, how to express and communicate their feelings or thoughts on maybe how they were brought up, or kind of how those thoughts are shifting on campus. What are maybe some other pieces of advice? I know you kind of mentioned connecting other students to each other, but as a student who maybe comes to you as a professional on campus and says, I don't know how I feel about this, or I'm feeling targeted in this way, I don't feel like I have a community at all to kind of express some of these thoughts. Some advice that maybe you would have for those particular students.
Students are immensely creative, and I found that to be the case like in every single instance that I probe a little further. And so specifically with my dissertation participants, like one of them wasn't finding community, and so they started their own support group and created it as a club or organization on campus. And so, like they weren't finding the support in their housing environment, they weren't finding the support, within their queer student organization. So they started their own. And, like they raised money for, other trans people to get like wigs, help out with like hormone replacement therapy, all those types of things, just so that they felt heard and connected. And also like it was more like I don't know, it felt like a very exclusive club, and like one that was really rooted in care for other people that identified as trans on that campus, which was very small. And so, students will find creative ways to come together if they're feeling lonely, if they're feeling disconnected. Like I always encourage them to like get connected to at least one person, and take it from there. Usually if they have some kind of sense of belonging, it's really easy to find other people that also think and want to do things similar to them.
Great. Alandis, maybe speaking to some of your research, and maybe some of your research kind of highlighted some of this, are there any particular unique challenges based on the type of institution that a student or an employee might be at, whether it be a small liberal arts versus large public or private? Any unique kind of hurdles or challenges based on institution types that you kind of saw through your research?
Yeah, so to put in perspective, like I studied all types of institutional climates in conjunction with my participants' experiences. And so some of them were at like religiously based institutions, some in like different regions of the country, some were in like, you know, more private universities and colleges, some were in like regional institutions, some were, you know, in large public institutions. And like, I feel like a lot of them had very similar experiences, even though they were at all these different types of institutions. Like the challenges at one institution were not unique. And so like they were still dealing with like, you know, transphobia. They were still dealing with like professors not asking their pronouns, or you know, like not having gender inclusive housing available, or feeling like the only one on their campus, even if it was a large campus. So yeah, like I think, you know, when it comes to the different institutional contexts and challenges that exist there, you know, I do think there are some institutions that have a little bit of a harder time in connecting the dots between, you know, like what are the goals for equity and inclusion, and what can the university actually do that's in line with their, you know, religious teachings. So like, for example, the participant that was like part of a religiously based college that was private, like they had a significantly harder time challenging administrators, just because like it had been done a certain way, even though it was rooted in radical education, the school was. So, and I think that there are a lot of challenges going on simultaneously. And so, you know, oftentimes universities have to prioritize, like, what's the most important thing I can do, like we're doing in the moment. So if they're dealing with scandal, if they're dealing with, you know, a specific identity-based issue, like, okay, that's great. You can move change a little bit quicker when you're dealing with, you know, higher publicity within, you know, like all different spheres. So like, I think, you know, in the midst of all of that, like every college is going to have challenges. It's going to be hard to move change. But like I said, like the more it can come from the student's perspective, I think the more it's going to actually take root. And that goes back to this idea from Dean Spade. He's like a translegal scholar, but he talks about this idea of trickle up social justice. So, and it's very similar in a lot of ways to this idea of like universal design. So like when we design things universally, they're going to be good for all people. So like elevators are really good for, you know, all sorts of people, including people with disabilities, and likewise like ramps and you know, Braille and all these things. So what can we do also to encourage change to come from like the people who are most impacted by that change? And so instead of coming policy development down, it goes from the bottom up. So like the grassroots activism, actual concerns from students, concerns and demands from students. Where do you see boycotts happening? You know, who is not on our campus? So like, you know, when I was recruiting participants, I wasn't expecting to get a lot of people, because trans people on campus make up a very small percentage of the population, and at least self-identified. So, you know, thinking about like the people and groups that we don't see on our campus, like people experiencing homelessness, undocumented folks, like they exist. But like, what are we doing to better their lives and better their chances that they're going to make it in college?
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Alandis, for kind of that summary. Are there any kind of closing thoughts that you wanted to share with our participants here today on our discussion topic?
Get involved. Like, it doesn't have to be anything big, but just try it out and see what shape or form it can take for you. I found it to be like incredibly rewarding to see like hard work and passion go into things that like I truly love and bring me joy. So if you can do that and create that in your life, like, I'm all for it. We need more invested professionals just across the board. So I appreciate the time and willingness that you all took out of your day to attend this webinar, because like that's something. An hour is a good chunk of time.
Great. Thank you so much, Alandis. I don't see any other questions. We'll maybe kind of leave it open there as I kind of wrap it up with a couple other things. But I do want to just, again, thank you so much, Alandis, for giving of your time. I know that you are attending a conference at NCORE, and so kind of stepping away and being able to provide your perspective, share a little bit about your research to kind of enrich our practice as professionals, and understanding around this topic is immensely beneficial. So we thank you so much for giving of your time.
Of course, it was a pleasure.
Great. So in kind of a summary, if there are no other questions for Alandis or for our larger discussion, I do want to kind of highlight a couple pieces as you continue to think about involvement on a professional, personal level, especially with the ACUHO network. So the LGBT network has a few ways that you can get involved. One is being able to join our Facebook group. So you can find us on Facebook at ACUHO LGBTQ network, and that is a page there that you can follow. Folks are often posting discussion pieces, job postings, things like that for the greater network. You can also follow the forum through the ACUHO online forums. Folks, again, will be posting several discussion pieces there, specifically related to our community, LGBTQ queer community. So I encourage you to log on there if you are already an ACUHO member and go ahead and follow that particular forum. One last major plug that I'd love to kind of put out there is that the network has heard the call for needed kind of greater involvement at the national level. And so we are looking to recruit our newest chair-elect for the network. That will be a 2-year term position, then following another 2-year term kind of serving as the chair for the network. So if that's something that you are interested in and getting involved, we highly encourage you to look at that application. You can find all that information on our Facebook page as well as the forum. But we're also looking to recruit, hopefully at a lower level, kind of regional and international representatives. So we would love to have region reps and international reps from every region of the organization. And so if you would please go ahead and check that out. Our deadline initially is this Friday. If we don't receive the applications that are needed, we will certainly reopen up that application process and maybe do some other recruitment at ACE on the 10th. So hopefully we will see you there and participate with us. There will also be a few other involvement pieces at the conference itself, a business meeting where we will share some of the pieces that the network is working on, and then opportunities to sit in on a roundtable discussion about what it's like to be LGBTQ in housing and residence life. So please check us out and check out all that information. We did have a couple comments here in the questions, and so I want to make sure that I get to those. So one of the questions coming from Shelley here is that you mentioned that sharing our story can be powerful. What suggestions or parameters do you have about professionals sharing their stories as LGBTQIA individuals, particularly demonstrating a balance between vulnerability and professionalism?
Definitely. I think it's dependent on you and like what you're willing to share and what ways that that you're exuding that vulnerability. You know, I think it's important that we tell our stories and tell them truthfully and fully. So, you know, like I'm a queer trans person who's also a cancer survivor, and like that informs my experience and the way that I see the world. And likewise, like you probably have your own unique journey that got you to this point. And so, um, you know, I always encourage people to share their stories because that's what we've got. Those are our life experiences. And not that we're trying to take away other people's life experiences by sharing our stories, but it helps us understand one another and empathize like with our own challenges that we've dealt with over the course of our lives. And so I think that's for me why it's important to share stories. And you know, and I mean, narrative research, that's all I did for the last 5 years. So like hearing all the participants' stories have made me a better individual because like I can understand where they're coming from and also see it in practice. And so it inspires me to make more change just because I want their lives to be better.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you again, Alandis, for your time. Wish you best of luck at NCORE. And just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be up on the ACUHO YouTube page, as I am told. So you can check out that resource there as we wrap up. So thank you again, everybody who was able to take their time to kind of listen in and participate. We wish you all the best in either closing out your academic year or kind of pushing through during the summer with all your planning and preparation for the fall. So thank you again on behalf of the LGBTQ Network and ACUHO.
And of course, if you have questions or anything like that and would like to connect further, I'm on social media, as well as you can email me at alandisj@gmail.com.
Yes, great reminder. Yes, you can also contact me, Derek Murakami, at my Gmail account, derek.murakami@gmail.com. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, all those kind of pieces. So you can also find me there. Most likely connected to many of the LGBT network pieces as well. So thank you again, and we wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.